Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another random review. Today's random review is Parasite from 2019. This is a Region A Blu-ray, but it's now available in Region B. This is a film by Bong Joo Ho, which became the first foreign film to win the Best Picture Oscar. I don't really pay attention to Oscars anymore, but I kind of wanted to leave this to watch later once the hubbub and the furore over it winning as a foreign film at the Oscars was over, and being a contrarian, I wanted to kind of watch it and say, you know, it's okay, but the film in fact is actually better than okay. It's excellent. So there's no bashing the Oscars for picking a mediocre film, which they tend to do quite a lot, because we all kind of know that the Oscars is a bit political, and there's certain films with certain roles for actors that tend to get more Oscar acclaim. Over the years there's been certain filmmakers that have almost kind of zeroed in on Oscar worthy topics in a desperate attempt to win some Oscars, as if that actually means anything, because usually 10 years after a film has won the best Oscar, it's generally forgotten about or not really talked about that much. But I think 10 years from now, Parasite will still be talked about as being an excellent film. It shouldn't be a surprise for those of us that know Bong Joo Ho's work. You'd kind of expect it to be beautifully shot, beautifully acted, and about stuff. It's obviously about class in Korea. He's quoted as saying it's really an anti-capitalist film. Even his monster movie, The Host, was part kind of socio-political. Obviously Snowpiercer was overtly about class, with the train going around the world and the privileged people at the front of the train and the kind of lower classes at the back of the train. So in this film it's about two families, the Kims and the Parks. The Kims headed by the wonderful Song Kang-ho, who will be a familiar face to those of you familiar with Korean cinema. And they're pretty much dirt poor. They make a living like folding pizza boxes by the 100. They live in a sub-basement, so the street is actually higher than what they live in. There's a running joke about a drunk that pretty much comes and urinates outside their window every night, and that leads to a beautiful scene in slow motion where the drunk's urinating and the sun's throwing water on him, which is beautifully lit. The film is part comedy, but then it goes into a slightly darker territory, as you probably would expect. I don't tend to do spoilery videos, but I'll maybe do just a little bit of spoiler near the end, but I will kind of let you know, so if you haven't actually seen the film, you can stop the video and go watch the film and come back if you like, or don't bother coming back if you're disgusted with the film. It's about the difference between the rich and poor. It reminds me a bit of High and Low with Kurosawa. The fact that it is a physical thing, you know, to get from the Kim's family's apartment to the Park's luscious house designed by a famous architect. There's lots of stairs. It's like it literally is a figurative and literal, descent to hell, which could be come across as a bit heavy-handed, but it doesn't really in this film, because it's like everything else, it's handled really well. If you're familiar with Korean cinema, which I am a little bit, but obviously not a huge amount, the film is just beautifully shot. It's technically very sound, and the acting is exemplary. Again, Song Kang-ho is fantastic. He's funny, but he does a lot. He doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but he does a lot with his eyes. You can kind of tell what's going on. So the basic premise is, through the Kim family's son, one of his friends is tutoring a rich high school kid, but he's leaving the country for a while. So because he wants to pretty much ask the high school girl to go out with him and potentially marry him when he comes back and she's a little older. And because he doesn't feel threatened by the son, he wants him to take his place, to essentially keep her warm until he comes back to the country. So he pretends to be a tutor, and that's how he gets in the door of the rich family. Again, in other countries, if the film was done by other filmmakers, you would know which side to root for, whether you should be on the side of the poor or the side of the rich. Obviously, depending on your political view, you might make that decision yourself. Again, the Parasite of the title is never made clear or referred to, even though the Parasite might actually just be capitalism. But again, if you have your own political views, you'll probably make up your own mind. Again, like all good artists, regardless of what form they work in, Bong Joo Ho doesn't judge. He doesn't judge the behaviour of the rich or the poor, in those simple terms. There's times where you like both families, there's times where you don't like both families, and again, probably your socio-political view will make you come down on one side or the other, but it's not that simple, because life's not that simple. It just shows them as people. Certain filmmakers would perhaps show the rich as kind of mustachioed, twirling villains who exploit the poor and things like that. Don't get me wrong, the father of the Park family perhaps has some views on people from the ghetto and kind of lower parts of society, as far as having money in a certain light. But again, it's not done as caricature. Everybody's just shown as people, and sometimes you do good things, sometimes you do bad things, regardless of your socio-economical background. So the son infiltrates himself into the family household to tutor the daughter, and then there's a housekeeper and driver already in employ, but the Kim family kind of hatch these plots to essentially get rid of them and replace them with themselves. So the daughter becomes an art teacher for the child, who had some trauma in the early part of his life, because he claims he saw a ghost in the house. We find out later on in the film what that actually was. And the father becomes the driver, and the mother of the Kim family becomes the housekeeper. So again, this is done in a fairly humorous and light manner, even though again you can argue on the morals of them doing this. But again, a lot of it comes from the desperation of living in a house that's below street level. So obviously, as the film goes on, the relationships between the two families kind of change, and then the Park family go away on a camping trip. The Kim family essentially move in and have a party, get drunk, talk about, dreaming about actually living in the house. And then the doorbell rings and the old housekeeper turns up. So that's where I'm going to leave it if you haven't seen the film. So I'm going to go into a bit of spoilers. I'm not going to go into every single detail. I'm not going to spoil it completely. But if you haven't seen the film, I would probably stop the video, go watch the film and come back if you wish. So when the old housekeeper turns up, we find out that not only in this kind of cross-section of society there's different levels as far as financial strata and architectural strata. The house itself has secrets and secret compartments that the architect kind of built in. So the housekeeper finds this secret door in the kitchen and she goes down to check on her husband. So her husband has been living in this secret dungeon essentially for about 4 years. The housekeeper was the architect's housekeeper, and then when the Park family took over from the architect, she stayed as the housekeeper. So because her husband, so she lived in, but because her husband was suffering from debts and debt collection, he's pretty much been staying in the basement of the house in this secret tunnel system in the house for like 4 years, and she would give him food every now and again, but obviously after her being removed from the household, he's been down there not getting food. But again, this is where it starts going a little bit darker, but it's also social commentary on, people that are so desperate they have to hide in hidden compartments in houses. So through a contrivance, which isn't the best contrivance ever made, the old housekeeper discovers that these 4 seemingly separate people are actually a family that have duped the rich family into coming into their house. So she wants to blackmail them to essentially get her position back, so her and her husband can go back to their strange living arrangements. So that's kind of a bit of a spoiler. I won't go into explicit spoilers and again what happens essentially, but it takes a darker turn as the Kim family want to try and keep their position in the house, and it all gets a bit uncomfortable until the ending of the film. The Kim family's house has been flooded with sewage water. They're pretty much all at breaking point, and the Park family want to have an impromptu garden party for their son's birthday. So you have the life and death struggle, but then they all get phoned to come in this frivolous garden party, and the kind of tensions within Mr. Kim and his family kind of boil over pretty much at the same time that the husband of the housekeeper manages to find a way of getting out from the basement. So it's a fairly, I mean, you can pretty much see it brewing up and boiling, but then it does have a fairly explosive finale. Things happen, people are hurt to various degrees, people go missing, and the film then kind of has a part kind of fantasy of the son wishing that things were different, and maybe one day through getting money himself he'll be able to set certain things to right. Again, I'm trying to be as vague as possible. Don't want to spoil it to every last detail. But again, where perhaps Hollywood or other filmmakers might have just stopped it at that fantasy point, Bong Joo Ho brings us back to pretty much the opening shot of the film, which is the street level. And again, we see it's just the son just hoping and dreaming that one day he'll be able to earn enough money. Again, depending on your viewpoint, you could come out of the film saying, yes, he's going to make it and he's going to earn money and he'll be able to sort out the problem. But I think that's been a little bit naive, considering what you've seen for the rest of the film. So chances are he's not going to be able to right the wrong, and there's not really going to be a happy resolution. But again, if you want to think that, then go ahead and think that, but I don't think that's a fairly realistic view. There's lots of wonderful details. Again, the father of the Park family always kind of goes on about how, you know, people of that kind have a different smell. I love the detail that after their house is like flooded with sewage water, you know, they go back to the house once it's all been emptied, but it's the same house, they're still living in it. You know, again, some other films they would be in different accommodation, or, you know, they'd be living somewhere else after that. But in this film, they're living in exactly the same sub-basement after it's been flooded with sewage water. So there is comedy in the film, but it is kind of black comedy, and then it becomes darker. But again, like all of these films, there always is a social political element in these films. This one is perhaps a little bit more upfront, but again, like all great films and great filmmakers, he doesn't judge the characters, he doesn't tell you how you should be thinking about the characters, he leaves it up to your own mind, pretty much. So I really enjoyed it. Again, the contrarian in me wanted to kind of go, yeah, it's okay, but it's typical Oscar-winning film that isn't actually that good. Because I think in general, in the mainstream of films nowadays, if a film's half decent, it's just boosted to, oh, it's a masterpiece. But in the grand scheme of film history, it's just a good film. But because there's a dearth, talking kind of mainstream terms, there's a dearth of really good films. Any time there's a half decent one, it's kind of blown out of proportion. But this one isn't. Obviously there's still people that won't like it, because again, it's slow to an extent, it's patient. But again, if you're used to world cinema, you're kind of used to that pace. It would only be if you're used to Hollywood, bang, 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 you know, cuts every 5 seconds, that you might get a little bit restless watching it. But if you're used to Asian cinema, if you're used to world cinema, then it's not a problem. It's just a really good film. It's just an excellent film. And hopefully this will, I don't value the Oscars on any level, but if it actually makes some people go check out films with subtitles, then I think cinema will be better for it. I think I've wasted enough of your time talking about Parasite. I did the 2 Japanese films based on manga, Parasite Part 1 and 2, so I thought I might as well do the other Parasite while I'm at it. I don't think I'll do the 80s horror film Parasite. I don't have that one. So please let me know in the comments below if you've seen Parasite, what you thought of it. And hopefully we'll see you again for more random reviews. And if you haven't seen it, I hope I didn't spoil it too much if you watched it to the end. So thanks very much for watching. This is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, saying take care and farewell.